Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the New Energy Advancement Hub, which is a platform offering cutting-edge research, innovative trainings, and business games and dynamic ecosystem development to drive your successful energy transition. My name is Tatiana Mitrova. I'm a research fellow at the Center on Global Energy Policy at Columbia University and also founder and director of the New Energy Advancement Hub. And today we are here for an event called New Energy Geopolitics, Global Transition, Clean Tech Arms Race, or Trade Wars? Question mark. I'm really very happy to introduce our speaker today, which is a good friend of mine, Paul Saunders, president of the Center for the National Interest, USA, and senior advisor at the Energy Innovation Reform Project. And I am sure Paul is the best positioned to talk about these very controversial, very provocative issues. So, just to start, Paul, thank you for being with us. My question, the first question is, do I feel right that the world is getting a bit crazy? Yeah, with Russia's invasion of Ukraine and all associated disruptions of oil and gas markets and all these energy crises in Europe, with the trade wars arising around energy transition about critical material, critical minerals and batteries and electric vehicles and all this stuff between the US, China, European Union, China, US and European Union. So what's going on? Why do we feel so much tension in the world? What's happening?
Well, first of all, Tatiana, thank you so much for having me with you today. It's really a pleasure and a privilege, and thank you to you and your colleagues at both at Columbia and at the New Energy Advancement Hub, where I think you all are doing really terrific work. Look, the things are a little bit crazy. I think it's hard to deny that. We have really a collision between two kind of grand historical processes that are underway. Honestly, there are more than two, but let's just focus on two for the moment. One being the kind of the evolution of the international system in the wake of the end of the Cold War, and there are a variety of different processes that are driving that. And then at the same time, we have this global energy transition that's underway. And the two things are intersecting. And energy, I find to be personally such a fascinating issue, really kind of for two reasons. One, because I think, honestly, if you look back at the history of human civilization over thousands and thousands of years, as a species, we have been constantly striving to have more energy. Because we want to do things and you need energy to do things. And some of that involves, I think it's happened in a lot of different ways. So some of it was organizing people, because when you have a small group versus a city versus a country, as you organize more people, you have more energy. But some of it is also kind of harnessing natural forces, first animals, later, wind and water, and, then obviously wood and fossil fuels, and now kind of back to wind and the sun, and certainly nuclear and other things. But there's been this constant quest to have more energy. And energy is so fundamental because it connects to everything else that we want to do as societies. Economic development, moving people and things from place to place, agriculture, anything that you can imagine. Energy is kind of the foundation for everything that we're able to accomplish. So it's natural that for those thousands of years, it's also been a source of contention, between different countries, city-states in the past, tribes or other social groups. That's one long dynamic that's been underway. And then, today, of course, we have kind of this slow evolution, which has been really accelerating in recent years of the international system. And again, there are a variety of different reasons for that. There are I think many who would sort of emphasize the rise of China, the rise of India, the growth of many of these other emerging economies, and as their economies have grown, they want to have and I think should have, in general terms, a sort of a greater role in international systems. But at the same time, there's clearly kind of this tension, with the United States, with Europe, with others who have been leading architects. So yeah, we're seeing these two huge historic forces collide. And wow, what a mess.
So, do I understand you correctly that there is actually this attempt to find a balance between quite natural desire of any state to increase its power on the international arena, using energy as well, focusing on the industrial policy, trying to develop as much as possible manufacturing domestically and to take control over all IP possible, and at the same time these are also quite legitimate and reasonable desire to avoid climate disaster, which actually, in a normal world, in an ideal world, would call for removal of any trading barriers and maximum labor division. If the batteries can be produced in the cheapest way in China, let produce them in China and decrease overall global investments in solar installations. So, what do you think? Is this balance achievable? And do we see any disproportion now between these industrial policy objectives and climate objectives?
Look, I mean, I think that's a good framework for thinking about what's happening. Speaking, narrowly about the United States, I think it was American policy for most of the period between the signing of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, in the early 1990s, through really to I would say almost the end of the Obama administration. I think the United States was really trying hard in its own way to work with others, with Europe, with China, with Japan, with Korea, with India, with others. And certainly, I think many had this idea that the United States would kind of be inventing all kinds of new things, and China would be making them and distributing them all over the planet, and that with these two nations as sort of the spine of the global economy, they would work together to drive the energy transition. Now, that I think we saw, 8 years ago, kind of, although there were certainly warning signs before that, but just from the perspective of American policy, that emerged as an approach that wasn't really realistic or sustainable. Partly because actually things are a lot more complicated than that. China was inventing things too. Americans also want to make things. It became a little bit muddled that way. But I think also certainly in the US and for that matter, many other Western countries, I think there were growing questions internally about the sort of the distribution of the benefits of globalization over the last 2-3 decades. And I think that certainly became an internal challenge. There were also, big concerns about, I would say, especially China's conduct, related to intellectual property, kind of market access and a variety of other issues. And, at a certain point, these two topics, I mean, the distributional one and the other concerns, they kind of became linked in the American context. And again, I think not only in the United States. That certainly has, contributed to these tensions. Looking ahead, that's always the hardest thing to do. But looking ahead, it seems to me that it's going to be very challenging to get back to the pathway that we were on in the past. And I think we're going to have to think about new approaches, to trying to deal with the climate challenge. And those have to be approaches that recognize the reality that we're living in a divided world and kind of an increasingly tense world.
So we are entering this era of global division, and we still have an existential climate threat. But at the same time, I've got impression that since 2022, when the war in Ukraine started, there was also a change in perceptions for many, many countries, for the majority of them, regarding energy security. You remember this energy trilemma thing from the World Energy Council? Yeah, affordability, energy security, and environmental sustainability. Yeah, everyone was focused on environmental sustainability for the last decade, and then suddenly it came up that gas can stop flowing in the middle of the winter, which is a big issue. So these concerns, not only regarding the domestic industrial policy, yeah, and keeping jobs inside the country and producing more solar panels or wind turbines domestically, but also the question of energy independency. Yeah, I think it became much higher on the agenda. Do you feel it as well?
Oh, absolutely. Look, I think if we talk about, the United States, Europe, some other OECD countries, Japan, Korea, I think for that group of countries, energy security in the post-Cold War era had really become mainly about price and not about access. Now, obviously, for much of the rest of the world, access to energy kind of has been a big problem throughout. But for the United States and many of its allies, it was really not that much a question of whether you could get the energy that you need. It was more about what was it going to cost. And I think, Russia's invasion of Ukraine certainly shoved back into the front of the mind and to the top of the list of concerns for government officials. Well, actually, maybe it's not just how much it costs. Maybe we won't actually be able to get, what we need. And certainly in Europe's case, I think there's some evidence that Russia's invasion of Ukraine and everything that's followed, that Europe actually is not getting as much gas as it needs, and that there are consequences for that in the European economy, broadly speaking.
Uh,
So sure. I mean, I think that was a very major development that has profoundly affected how people think. Now, we did have, of course, also the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think that really, where we talk about, not just fossil fuels, but some of the other forms of energy, solar, wind, batteries, some of those technologies. I think the pandemic really thrust the supply chain questions into the forefront. You know, basically at the same time from a historical perspective, obviously a little bit sooner, but in terms of policy responses, I think generally speaking, at the same time. So I think we also see, policymakers and for that matter, company executives, increasingly thinking about, well, where do we get the critical materials or components, that we need for systems that we build. And of course, at the same time, I mean, the United States and its allies are kind of trying to use that as leverage in their own way, in dealing with Russia, in dealing with China, and in some others. And here I'm talking perhaps a little bit less about energy, but more about things like microchips or other products or technologies. And no, maybe that isn't energy, but some of it certainly goes into energy-related systems. And regardless of whether or not it does, I think it also kind of highlights this question of our ability as societies to get everything that we want and need.
so it looks like there are a bit different approaches to this energy security and import dependency, including like critical minerals and all the supply chain vulnerability, um, different between the countries. So if we name the most important players in the energy transition, I think it's fair to say that it's USA, China, and European Union. Yeah, so the leaders in terms of volumes, in terms of investments, in terms of technology portfolio and manufacturing capacities, basically. But it seems that they all have a bit different perspectives and a bit different strategies. So, could you describe each of these actors? What is driving their decision-making process? What is standing behind? Maybe it could help us to understand where all this stuff is moving.
I'll do my best. I'll do
I know, it's difficult task.
so look, where the United States is concerned, I think that there are multiple factors that are driving American policy. Let's just focus on policy, today during the Biden administration, and the Biden administration gives kind of particular weights to particular drivers, and a different administration might weight things differently. Certainly, though, I think for the Biden administration, the main drivers are the economy and jobs, and bringing manufacturing back to America. and they are trying to harness a lot of that in service to reducing emissions. But I think the main driver is and has been economic, and actually, I would argue that that's really been the main driver of American policy. Again, since the UNFCCC, was signed. Where the European Union is concerned, the EU has certainly elevated emissions reductions and made that an organizing principle for much of its policy, trying to set an example for the rest of the world, and to use sort of a combination of its moral leadership and its regulatory pressure to bring others along with that. That hasn't really fully succeeded. That might even be a little bit generous. Maybe I should say it hasn't succeeded. I think if we look at recent European parliamentary elections, we get a little bit of a taste of how sustainable a lot of that is likely to be in an environment in which others aren't following. It's very hard to continue to be a leader on something when others don't follow. So I think from my point of view, that's kind of the big question for the EU and for many of the EU member governments. Where China is concerned, look, I think China certainly is also prioritizing its own economic development, but linked even more strongly than in the American case to sort of the political legitimacy of the Chinese government, and it becomes kind of a factor of domestic stability. So I view the Chinese approach ultimately as one that is kind of motivated by this need to ensure continued growth and continually increasing standards of living for an enormous population, one that would be an extreme challenge for any government. Certainly India, facing a very similar challenge from that perspective, but in a different place, of course, historically. But where China is concerned, I think this great pressure to continue to deliver jobs and growth, and at the same time, very real energy security concerns of its own, as its energy consumption has grown. I haven't looked at the numbers, but I would have to imagine that it might be historically unprecedented growth in energy consumption. So for any government, to manage that and to think about, of course, both the cost, but also the security, and security, in an environment, taking it back to the geopolitics and the competition, in an environment in which, the U.S. Navy is the kind of the dominant maritime force along China's critical supply lines, for energy and for many other economic inputs. So I think that has driven, domestically in China, sort of a renewed effort to try to be self-reliant or energy independent or whatever one would like to call it, And certainly that has been a big driver behind, wind and solar and EVs. So certainly, all of the three, being linked really, because when you're talking about EVs, obviously you need, more electricity for that. You're kind of substituting electricity for oil that you might otherwise, import through the Straits of Malacca. So I think that's what's occurring in the Chinese case, largely. It's not the greatest mix in terms of getting these three key actors, to work together.
Let me make the situation even more complex. So, you've mentioned actually already the results of the European elections, which are quite disappointing for the Green parties. And you've mentioned that the US elections are approaching, which could actually change the pattern. I don't see, frankly, any drivers which could change Chinese policy, yeah, at least not elections, definitely. But there are some more important geopolitical factors in the confrontation between the US and China, which could actually make these concerns regarding energy security even more important, right? So, in this changing world, which has, if I'm not mistaken, more than 70% of the world population this year are changing, re-electing their governments, so there is a lot of change ongoing. What do you think it would mean for the energy transition? Yeah, so by the end of the day, we are not trying to transition just for the sake of being in transition. Yeah, there are some goals which we as humankind are trying to achieve. First of all, climate goals. Yeah, there are also lots of technological advantages, and I know many people who are fond of solar and wind simply for their technology elegance. Yeah, and these flat energy and all the smart grids and energy democratization, I would say, yeah, which also sounds great for many people. But where are we heading with these changes in the political and geopolitical landscape? What is your perception? Are these changes for the good, for the bad, or will it be simply a different path?
Well, look, I'm not going to try to guess about, elections affecting 70% of the people on the planet. That's definitely well beyond my capabilities. But I think what I would say is that, when we started the conversation, I talked probably too long, about my historical perspective about this kind of human quest for more energy across thousands of years. And I think one of the great challenges that we're confronting in the energy transition is that, I think humanity as a totality wants more of everything, including energy. But having more energy is kind of critical to getting more of everything else. So in trying to execute an energy transition, to reduce emissions, we have to square that with, having more energy rather than less. And that means realistically, in sort of broad terms, making it cheaper rather than more expensive. That's hard, actually. And I think what we've been seeing over the course of the last, 5 to 10 years here, but it's become certainly especially sharp, as you mentioned, after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, I think what we've been seeing is our sort of climate aspirations increasingly just colliding with the realities of the world that we live in. Vaclav Smil, who I think is a very capable and talented analyst on these matters. You know, he's described the global infrastructure, the global system for extracting, processing, transporting, refining, distributing fossil fuels as the largest artifact of human civilization. The biggest thing that we have as a species have built, in 10,000 years. And when you think about the fact that for like the last, decades, that's been producing 80% of the energy that we use on Earth, it's not an easy thing to change that from, we're down into the 70s, now, but that's 30 years after, the UNFCCC, again, to keep going back to the Framework Convention, it's 30 years after that. It's just a really, really big job. And the fact that we have these geopolitical rivalries underway, it certainly does further complicate it. And I think from my point of view, getting to the question of, what can we try to do about this, because, that's really our task here. I think that, for those of us, again, kind of in the West, where I am, I would say I kind of expect two things to happen that will sort of help us to move toward reducing emissions. Maybe not in the ideal, optimal ways, but I think it will sort of, generally speaking, help us to move in that direction. One is that we are absolutely having an arms race around energy technology, but between the United States and China, and to a lesser extent, honestly, the EU, I think, in that specific area. But we're sort of harnessing our the competitive side of our human nature. And again, maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing. I expect there's a little bit of both involved. But I think that's going to happen. And I think it's going to help to reduce emissions because it will accelerate the development of some technologies. I think will accelerate the deployment of some technologies. And not just in America and in China, but we're certainly also going to be competing to sell these systems to others. And the United States is kind of behind in some important areas there. So to the extent that we try to compete, we're going to have to do a lot, and that only further stokes the competitive dynamic. But the second thing I think that we're going to see happen, which I think also will help, is I think the United States and many of its allies, and here I would include the EU, Japan, Korea. I think over time, we will work toward building a zone in which it will be easier than it is today for money and technology and people to flow in this area and in others. But certainly with a focus on clean energy systems, among other important areas. And I think inside this space, there will be deeper cooperation that will accelerate some of these things. And I think that the countries inside that space are also going to be looking hard at how they can work together to bring those things to places outside that space. And a lot of that is going to be, again, kind of driven by this desire to compete.
I really like this point about competition. I'm a big fan of competition, and it's really a very good driver and incentive. And again, it's something in human nature. And this idea that raising confrontation and maybe even aggressive competition, by the end of the day, it can actually be beneficial for the technology development. Yeah, and we have this example of the arm race, yeah, which was fueling a lot of innovations, well, in the military sector, but not only. Think where internet is coming from. Yeah, and also this idea of the potential unification of, let's say, the global West, yeah, as a single player on this arena. And I'm thinking where the European Union is coming from. Actually, it was a union for steel and coal initially. Yeah, so this transatlantic partnership on energy transition technologies also sounds good. Yeah, and it could be an option. And I agree that by the end of the day, the developing countries, the poorest economies, will only benefit from the battle between the two giants. Yeah, because they can negotiate with both and get probably better conditions and better prices and so on. So that sounds a bit more inspiring, yeah,
But,
compared to the beginning of our discussion. But yeah, I want to listen
you
about
know,
but.
I was going to say, but it's not unambiguously rosy, because there are also elements of this that work in the other direction. The Biden administration, put 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs coming to the United States. Now, those levels are quite. I mean, the levels of the numbers of Chinese electric vehicles actually being sold in the United States are extremely low. But maybe they're going to stay that way. And since those vehicles are cheaper than domestically made EVs, maybe there are fewer EVs in America than there might otherwise be, right? So, and the EU, obviously, I think just this morning actually announced its own somewhat lower tariffs on a number of EVs made in China. So, and that's not going to be the only place where we're going to see tariffs. So that's one challenge. Another challenge, looking at the United States and our allies, and naturally we all love one another dearly and want to work together closely. But I mean, Ford is a competitor of BMW,
Yeah,
and they're all competing with Hyundai, and so the competition isn't only between quote unquote the West, and Japan and Korea, and China. It's also, inside the West. And if we start thinking in, those terms, And we think about a world where, you know, the US and its allies are kind of building walls to keep out things from China, but they're all competing kind of viciously with one another inside the wall. Uh, then you know, I think I sort of hope that actually our companies would get a lot better at doing what they're doing, and you know, be better positioned to compete with China. But I imagine that, you know, we also may see some consolidation in a lot of those markets, and that may be kind of painful at the national level for a number of countries. So
Yeah, and
it,
also raise
it
antitrust
you
issues,
know,
I
it's
assume.
not
Yeah, we
uh,
see it with the IT giants, yeah, and it's really problematic. But
yeah.
I have two questions here. So the audience is asking, what about Chinese companies opening factories and manufacturing facilities overseas? So then it's not subject to tariff. Yeah, so just recently, Chinese EV producers opened large factory in Brazil, for example, and there are all these rumors about Chinese automotive producers moving inside Europe and actually taking over several German concerns, which are in a very bad financial state. So, what do you think about such penetration?
Well, I think that's bound to provoke initially attention, and there's already attention to it, but reasonably soon, you know, a response by policymakers, because I think policymakers in the U.S. and in EU and other places, they're alert to that. I mean, look at solar. I mean, that's already happened in the case of solar. You know, there were Trump administration solar tariffs, and in some cases bans on products coming from China. And you know, suddenly there were solar panels coming from four different countries in Southeast Asia that had to the United States, and they hadn't really been you know, exporting so many in the past. And the Biden administration, you know, responded to that. So I think we will see more and more attention to those questions. It's going to be tough, though, and particularly where the United States is concerned. I think Mexico, which of course is a free trade partner with the United States, is going to become kind of an increasing challenge for American policy from this perspective of, you know, trying to manage, you know, what's coming into the United States from China, or relying on China. Uh, I think that's going to be it's going to be a tough one, and you know, ultimately the you know, the problem with all let's call them administrative measures, you know, like this, tariffs, bans, you know, other kinds of restrictions. You know, one other element of human nature that we haven't talked about yet is this burning desire to find ways around every obstacle. Okay.
That's true.
Which, you know, we could also describe in English as gaming the system, right? And I think we're going to see a lot of that too. And it's just going to be a constant, you know, battle between people who are trying to make do and sell things on the one hand, and government regulators on the other hand, or political officials for that matter, elected officials on the other hand, who again sort of want to be controlling in various different ways what can come in and what can't.
Yeah, sounds inspiring. Yeah, at least it will not be boring for sure. Yeah. I've got another question from the audience. Do they, US and Europe, have enough capacity to produce all the EVs and solar panels needed domestically?
Not at this point.
Hmm.
I think that's fairly clear. And frankly, I think it's going to be an uphill battle to get to a place where we would, and that's kind of a big question. China, certainly in both of those markets, I mean, EVs, batteries, and solar, China's in a very dominant position and not an easy one to compete with. I think if I were an American technology official, or for that matter, an EU or Japanese or Korean official, I think I would be asking myself, how much effort do I want to put into competing in a market where somebody else has a 75, 80%, position, versus trying to develop other things that are new and better and cheaper and more desirable. In the United States, I am not a nuclear physicist, and I won't express a view on, whether nuclear fusion is 2 years away, 5 years, as some people say, or 5 years away, or 50 years away, in the way that it
As
has.
usual.
Right, exactly. For the last 50 years, I can't express an informed opinion on that. But there is a single American company that has raised $2 billion in private capital to build a nuclear fusion system. And they think that they're going to have one working, in the foreseeable future. I mean, in the near term, single digit years here. Um, so there are a lot of other things out there that I think, we as Americans, but also we in the broader sense of kind of humanity as a totality, there are a lot of other things that we can do. I mean, the advances in, material science and other areas, and I think certainly with machine learning and AI, we've already seen that applied to discover, new drugs. I think we're going to be able to apply these technologies to a lot of other things. So, I certainly am, actually pretty optimistic, that the list of technologies we have now, it isn't kind of the furthest extent of what we're going to be able to accomplish. And I hope that the United States and our allies, will give some thought, and more than thought, some really significant support actually to developing new ideas, including ideas that people don't have yet. By the way, and I'm sure there are some of those too. So I think that's another big question for us. Again, us, and here I'm narrowing that down, us, in America and in allied countries, as we think about competing, is what is it that we want to compete to do? Do we want to compete to make more batteries at a lower price for EVs? Or do we want to compete to have a better transportation option?
I like this question. Yeah, because putting a criterion for these trade wars and all the competition, yeah, who wins? Yeah, what is the price? And indeed, just increasing the size. Yeah, actually, what China did in the past 2 decades with scaling up most of the renewables, it was very beneficial for their internal economic growth, but actually it was not incredibly profitable, to be frank. Yeah, and I've got an impression, and again, correct me. What do you think about it? That with this artificial intelligence breakthrough, which is really impressive, that actually we are going to see incredible growth in labor productivity in all economic sectors, most likely. I mean, if properly applied, obviously, yeah. So there are already very impressive results in the energy sector where it is related to digitalization of energy. It's also producing a lot of additional demand for electricity. So there is a sort of loop here. But basically, with all these new technologies and with quantum computing approaching somewhere, again, like nuclear fusion. So uh, what do you think about this technology race? Uh, is it possible? So in China, it's quite clear. It's all coming from the state funding, and the state funding is really impressive. And all the other administrative state support, it's incredible. Yeah, everybody working together to develop or to copy paste and apply new technologies. Within the European Union, United States, and the other allies, is it going to be also like Keynesian approach, yeah, and some massive state funding from DARPA, from the Department of Energy, and so on? Or do you think that venture business and private investors are actually able to provide funding for such large scale race?
Sure. Well, I mean, that's a huge, big, complicated question with a lot of different angles to it. I mean, look, where China is concerned, what's a little bit, and I'm no expert on China, but what's intriguing to me about the Chinese approach is, I think the Chinese government has managed to incorporate many sort of market competition elements into its fundamentally state-driven approach. And what I mean by that is, you have the central government kind of say that electric vehicles and batteries are a major priority. And then every provincial government across China says, oh my God, electric vehicles and batteries are a really key priority for the central government. What are we doing to make that happen? And they all sort of want to have their own thing that they can point to, that is our success as a provincial government. So everybody creates their own thing. And then they're all kind of viciously competing with each other, in China's internal market, and it has, it does allow them to reap some of the advantages of kind of having a competitive market economy. I think the danger in situations like that often is that, you kind of stick with things too long, or from an economic perspective, and, I'm, along with not being a nuclear physicist, I'm also not an economist. But from an economic perspective, you can also engage in kind of value destroying behavior uh, that isn't necessarily that obvious in your government prepared GDP figures, for example. Uh, so, where the West is concerned, look, I mean, part of the reason that I said what I said a minute ago about EVs and batteries and 80% market dominance, and maybe we should invent something else. Part of the reason I said that is, and I don't know the answer to this question, but is there enough taxpayer money, in the United
Yeah.
States and the EU and Japan and Korea, even if we combined all of it and put it into a pile, and, which we're not going to do. But even if we did that, is there kind of enough tolerance in those democratic societies to make that money available to EVs and batteries and critical mineral mining and processing and all of that other stuff? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Clearly, there has to be sort of a mix of government and private support. And as you very rightly point out, there are certain things that companies are going to do, and there are other things that companies aren't going to do because the risks are too high. And, I think in the United States, at least, there's been a lot of very good scholarship and other work on those issues. I think, we understand pretty well as an expert community, what the problems are, and there are a lot of good ideas about how to address that. Certainly one big challenge, and not unique to the United States, I think across our democratic systems, is sort of mobilizing the political system to generate the outcomes that we need. No.
Well, Paul, I've promised you that I will not keep you longer than 1 hour, and we are approaching, unfortunately, to the end. I have another 5 questions, but sorry, I've promised. So before we finish our conversation, I would ask you to make a brief conclusion. So, what do you think is the most important takeaway that our listeners should remember about this topic? One
Well,
phrase or
sir,
couple.
I'll try to be very brief. Look, reality is messy and complicated, and you can kind of try to ignore reality, and sometimes you even can ignore it for a period of time. But the longer that you ignore reality, the more painful and expensive it becomes to accommodate to it in the end. So I think the most important thing for all of us, is really to look very realistically at the environment that we're in politically, economically, geopolitically, in technology, everywhere else, and to operate on that basis. And just do our best, to kind of to take the next step. Vision and ambitious goals are critical because if you don't have those, you can't accomplish anything. But I think realism is also essential in kind of focusing our efforts.
Wow, I love this. Thank you, Paul. And actually, for me, it sounds also as justification of what we are doing with our business games on energy transition, because that's exactly an environment where you take the roles and you play with the different factors. Yeah, you try yourself in the shoes of decision makers in different countries and companies and regulators, and you see all these complexity, and you start to feel it as your own experience, not just as a theoretical concept. So I'm glad that you agree about this complexity, and I really love this point about realism. Yeah, because living in this rosy shadow doesn't help when we are dealing with such a tremendous threat. So, Paul, thank you so much. It was extremely, extremely interesting, and I've learned a lot and many, very interesting and nice points. So, everyone, please stay with us at the New Energy Advancement Hub. We will make some shorter videos with some certain quotes from Paul, yeah, and follow us to participate in the business games, which I've mentioned, and for a lot of other interesting things. Thank you so much, and goodbye.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.